So good evening, Bhante. So today, if continue of the session, I still have some questions left behind on last Friday. Forgot to ask. So there's a few things that I would like to have more to clarify certain things, especially in the term of this anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Especially the part with anatta, because anatta, like a lot of books translated in different meaning. Then some say that what do you call it? They say no soul. So I want to have to ask Bhante, what Bhante view on this term anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Can Bhante explain in the detail?
Well, that is a question that the Buddha himself answered when Vachagotta came and asked the Buddha, is there a self? The Buddha was silent. Then is there no self? And he was silent. Is there both self and no self? And he was silent. Is there neither self nor no self? He was silent. So Vachagotta thought Buddha doesn't want to speak to him, and he went away. Then Ananda, his disciple, asked Buddha, why didn't you answer that man's question? And he said, when he asked, is there a self? I said, yes. I would be siding the eternalist view. Now, eternalist means that if there is a self, that it will continue from life to life, that self will continue. And he said, if I said there is no self, then I would be siding the annihilationist view, which is that when you die, you are not born again. That is the annihilationist view. And then he said, I have always said, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. Now, if I have said Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, it means that everything, their Dhamma refers to everything that we think of. Anatta. There the word anatta means, the best translation I have is impersonal. Now impersonal means it cannot be identified as yourself or even yours. You can't say this is mine or this is myself. everything is impersonal. This word personal is very important because it's a very useful word in English that conveys the idea very well. When you say something is mine, if you say this cup is mine, that is called personalizing the cup. To say this cup is mine is to personalize the cup. So what we call personality is what we personalize. Everything that we personalize becomes my personality. That means whatever I call mine becomes myself. That is the thing. Even if you say you have a motor car and you say this car is mine, that car has become yourself. How is that? Because if you're having an expensive car, then people will think you are a great person because you have an expensive car. Or if your car is cheap, they will think you are a cheap person. So you depend on what you think is yours. If you have a big house, then people will think you are a big person. If you have a small house, then people will think you are a small person. So whatever you call mine becomes yourself. So your personality is what you have personalized. So whatever you have personalized becomes your personality. So this is why this word anatta is simply that there is nothing that you can call mine or myself. That is the meaning of personality. Anatta. Sabbe dhamma anatta. All things are impersonal. There is nothing that we can personalize and say this is mine or myself. Now in Pali you have it also. Etan mama, eso hamasmi, eso me attati. Etan mama means this is mine. Eso hamasmi means this is me. Eso me attati means this is myself. So there is nothing that we can call mine or me or myself. And the important thing to understand is that upadana pachya bhavo. Upadana means to say this is mine or to personalize. Upadana today is translated as grasping or clinging or something like that. But it's not grasping or clinging. Upadana means to personalize, to say this is mine. Upadana Pachya Bhava. Bhava means being or coming into existence. So it is by personalizing that I come into existence. That means the self comes into being through personalizing. Upadana Pachya Bhava. Bhava means being. Today translated as becoming. That is the wrong translation. Bhava is being or existence. I said last time that there is a difference between being and becoming. Being is existence. Becoming means it is a change. You become something else. That is, it is a change, changing. From the time we are born, we keep on changing. From when you are born as a very small child. And gradually you begin to keep on changing till you become an adult. And then even after becoming an adult you keep on changing. Then you begin to grow old and ultimately you fall sick and die. So from the time you are born till the time you die, it is a change that is going on all the time. And that changing is what is called becoming. But the problem is, although it is a becoming, we are thinking we are being, as if we are not changing. So that is the problem. So the being is the delusion. Being is the delusion. And because of this delusion of being, that we become unhappy. When the one thing, we have made the body myself. When the body begins to grow old, we think I am growing old. Because the body has become myself. And when the body dies, you say, I am dying. Or when the body was born, you say, I was born. So you are identifying yourself with the body. That is the mistake. So if we can understand that this body is not myself, if we don't personalize the body, then I don't exist. And if I don't exist, I cannot die. To die, you have to exist. And if you don't exist, how can you die? So it is simply the body that is growing old and dying, not yourself. There is no self here. This is the point. So if you have given up this idea of self, then there is no problem. So that's the important thing. Anything else?
Which one pass away first? Consciousness or the self?
Consciousness
Or the self?
the self?
Yeah.
What?
When the person die,
Ah.
when the person die, there's a lot article that say the soul left the body.
Oh, those are just beliefs of different cultures. You see, the Western culture is mainly believing in a God that created the world, and they believe that whenever a person is born, that God will put a soul into the body. That putting the soul into the body is called incarnation. Incarnation. And when a person dies, that soul comes out of the body. That is called discarnation. Discarnation is the soul coming out of the body. And they think the soul remains without a body. So that soul without the body is called the discarnate spirit. So the word spirit refers to the soul. So the discarnate spirit, that is the soul without the body. So when we talk about rebirth, they think that discarnate spirit re-enters a body, goes into another body. So that is called reincarnation. So reincarnation is a Christian concept and not a Buddhist concept. Some people, even especially the Tibetan Buddhists, they speak of reincarnation. That is incorrect use of words. The word reincarnation should never be used for Buddhist thinking, because there is no soul to be reincarnated. And another concept is transmigration. The word transmigration also means that a soul is migrating from one life to another. That is like going on a tour, you see. Migration is that if you come from a different country to this country, that is called migration, which is, we speak of immigration or immigrant visa or something like that. That is the same thing as migration. And so transmigration means that again a soul goes from one life to another. But in Buddhism we don't call it transmigration or reincarnation. Instead of that we use rebirth. The word rebirth means a birth, another birth. Now that word rebirth is similar to reproduction. Now when you speak of reproduction, the parent and the child are two different things. Reproduction. So in the same way, the person who dies and the person who is born are two different things. This is because the body is different. The body that dies is not the body that is born again. It's a different body. So, but there is no soul to go from this life to the other life. So there is no soul involved. The only thing that we can talk about is what we call the mind. So the mind is not a thing that is like a soul. It's not a thing that is there. What we call the mind is an activity, like a flame. Now if you have a flame, that is, you say you have a candle and the candle is burning. So when the candle is burning, every moment it is a new candle that is burning. The flame is new all the time. So you don't have another flame. But the continuation of the flame is the continuation of an activity. So you take that flame and light another candle. What has happened? Did the flame in this candle go to the other candle? No, it's a new flame there. So rebirth takes place like that. So in rebirth it is always a new thing. Because what we call the mind is always a new thing. It's like a flame, it's an activity, not an entity. That is why these two words, activity and entity, are important. What we call the soul is an entity that continues in the next life. But an activity, although the activity continues, it is a different activity. Now, to understand this, we could also use the modern technology. Now, you speak here, and then you are recorded, and you play the recorder, the same voice comes up, but it is not the same voice. You understand? or if it is received somewhere else on a TV, the same kind of voice is there, but it is a different thing. These are just activities. So the activities can be transferred like this. But it is a new thing. So when we speak of rebirth, it is something like that.
When the fetus,
Huh?
fetus.
Fetus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those baby in pregnancy time,
Huh?
those who have baby,
Baby.
yeah, during pregnancy time.
When you are doing?
No, when there's this lady, they have pregnancy time, pregnant time.
Yeah.
So there's baby, there's when's the mind connected to the fetus? How many weeks to get the process?
That is also very important to understand. You see, people think that, you see, the fetus means that comes up when two cells come together. What is called the sperm and the ovum. A cell comes from the woman and another cell comes from the man. And these two cells unite. That is, the sperm and the ovum come together, and then a third cell is formed. The third cell is called the zygote. That is the word that they use in science. When the sperm and the ovum unite, a new cell is formed that is called the zygote. But the nature of these cells is that every cell that is born grows old and dies. It doesn't remain forever. But it produces new cells. So what happens is that zygote as a cell will break into two, and then the two also begin to break, and it becomes 4, and the 4 becomes 8, and the 8 becomes 16, and so on. It keeps on breaking, and new cells are being formed, and the old cells are dying. They don't remain. New cells are being formed. And so we get what is called the embryo. The embryo is produced by the zygote. Zygote turns into the embryo. And then the embryo begins to grow further. And a time comes when the embryo begins to take a human baby shape. When it takes the baby shape, it is called the fetus. The embryo turns into a fetus, and the fetus begins to grow. And then a time comes when properly the brain is formed. And with the formation of the brain becomes like a TV set. to be able to receive vibrations coming from outside. And that is where the real rebirth takes place. And that happens really when the fetus has grown up to about 6 months. That is the time when the mother begins to feel the baby moving. That is the time when the reception occurs. And that is the time we can really speak of rebirth. That is the thinking part comes up at that point. So till then it is only the formation of the TV. And then it is not a fetus anymore, then it becomes a baby. And the baby is born. But even when the baby is born, that baby, the brain is not fully developed. The baby, the infant cannot really think. Gradually the thinking begins to grow also. And that is how the rebirth takes place. It's just a matter of growth.
Okay, now come to the six sense basis. The six sense basis.
Senses, yeah.
So, how can we interact, interconnections within all the senses together?
The important thing to understand is that now we already understood that everything starts with a cell. The cell is supposed to be living because all plants, animals, these are supposed to be living. Now, living doesn't mean being conscious. Consciousness is not the same thing as life. So we have to understand that living is a electromagnetic or electrochemical activity. It is just an activity that is going on. Mainly it's electrical. And that activity is simply that cells are formed and the cell begins to get destroyed. So there are two processes going on at the same time, a building up process and a breaking down process. A building up and breaking down. So the building up process is called anabolism and the breaking down process is called catabolism. But both are going at the same time. That is called metabolism. So that process of building up cells and breaking down cells is what we call life. So life is simply an electrochemical activity. It is not a real conscious thing. It is happening unconsciously. And why it happens is simply based on this principle called determinism. Determinism means that whatever happens in the world happens only due to the presence of the necessary conditions. That is called determinism. So when the necessary conditions are present, it happens. Just like lightning or thunder or earthquakes or tornadoes. All these things are happening only due to the presence of the necessary condition. So when the conditions are present, it happens. Now this is what is called determinism. And it is this principle that is the basis of all the modern scientific inventions and discoveries. Everything is based on this. And it is this law or natural law or natural principle that the Buddha called Paticca Samuppada. The word Paticca Samuppada simply means it happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions. That is the meaning of Paticca Samuppada. Hetum Paticca Sambhutam Hetu Bhanga Nirujjati. When the hetus or conditions are present, it happens. When the conditions are absent, it does not happen. So the life is a thing that is going on due to the presence of the necessary conditions. So this thing called life continued, and that it turned into what is called evolution. So what is called evolution is simply this continuation of this struggle. This is what Charles Darwin saw it as, a struggle for existence. There is no person doing the struggling because it is not consciously done. It is only happening. So there is not, although he called it a struggle, it is not a struggle that is done by anyone. It is just an unconscious process. So, but the problem is that this, whenever this struggle, of course, is not being supported by the environment. The environment is going against this. This struggle to continue in this way is always obstructed by the environment. But still the struggle goes on, not by fighting with the environment, but by adapting to the environment. Adapting means the struggle somehow keeps on going by changing. It is like water, if it is dripping from some place. If there is a block somewhere, it begins to go in another direction. So like that, the struggle keeps on going, even if it is blocked by the environment. And that is the adaptation. And because of the adaptation, changes take place in this struggle. And so, somehow, it goes on because the cells that are produced begins to combine the molecules combine to form cells, and the cells combine to form tissues, tissues combine to form organs, organs combine to form systems, systems combine to form organisms. And that is how gradually the evolution takes place. And ultimately, the plants turn into animals, and the animals ultimately keep on evolving, and ultimately the human being comes into being. And this development keeps on going till it begins to produce a thing called a brain. It is only when the brain comes into being, a part of the brain begins to develop, which is called the cerebrum, that begins to think. So the brain gets an ability to think. So it is the thinking ability that produced what is called consciousness. There is no consciousness if there was no thinking. So the thinking is the thing that started this thing called consciousness. So when consciousness came into being, you begin to become conscious of a thing called the world. If there was no consciousness of a world, we cannot speak of a world. And along with the world comes another consciousness, consciousness of a self. So we begin to become conscious of a self in the world. So it is all happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions. It's not done by any person. It is happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions. That's all. And so out of these human beings who are becoming conscious, there came this human being called Charles Darwin, who began to think about these things. But another person came into being, whom we call the Buddha, who not only saw these things happening, he also began to understand that this whole process that is going on is a mistake. Why is it a mistake? It is struggling to exist where existence is not possible. It is a struggle to exist. But every person or every effort that is trying to exist has to die. Death is the opposite of what existence was. Existence means trying to keep on living. But however much you are trying to keep on living, you die. And when death comes again, another thing starts, what we call rebirth. So that means the struggling is continuing. And this is just a mistake that is going on. So when the Buddha began to realize that this is all a mistake. And there is no real purpose in struggling like this. And the struggle is not only a useless thing, it is also a painful thing. So the struggle is not only futile, it is also painful. And this is why it became necessary to stop this struggle. So now a problem comes, how can we stop this struggle? You see? So that is how we saw that this struggle, it is consciously going on now. Not only it was started in an unconscious way. Now consciously we keep on struggling. And the only way to stop it is to realize that this is a mistake. We are not even existing. We are only thinking we are existing. So it is only when we are able to understand this. It is the thinking process itself. By becoming aware of this, that it can be stopped. Because everything is happening unconsciously. And that unconscious process is the emotion. It is the emotion that is called tanha. Tanha is the emotion. And it is this emotion that is continuing this. So, if we begin to understand this properly and become aware of this emotional process, that struggle can stop. So, it is only by becoming aware of how this delusion of existence comes into being. It is through that awareness itself that that process can stop. That awareness is the real panya or prajna. So the ultimate thing is we need that prajna or panya. That full awareness. And that awareness is what I call a paradigm shift. A paradigm means a way of looking at things. And this paradigm has to be changed. The paradigm means we are thinking that we are existing. There are two paradigms. One is what I call the existential paradigm. And the other is the experiential paradigm. So we have to change from the existential paradigm to the experiential paradigm. In the existential paradigm, we are thinking of a self that is living in the world. The world exists and the self exists, and the self exists in the world. That is the existential paradigm. But when we begin to understand this fully, we begin to see that there is no existence at all. There is no world that exists, there is no self that exists. What we call existence is simply an experience. There is only an experience, but there is no real existence. So it is only by changing from the existential paradigm to the experiential paradigm, that the process stops. That is the awakening from the dream of existence. So the Buddha is called the awakened one who has awakened, because we are dreaming. So the existential paradigm is a dream. We have to awaken from that dream.
I saw one article written by Bhante. That title is Buddhism as a Psychotherapy. Then in that article, Bhante mentioned something about this Sigmund Freud idea of it and super ego.
Ego and super ego.
So can Bhante explain detail about it?
Well, what he saw was what the Buddha also saw. Now, I told you first thing is to understand that there is no such thing as a mind separate from the body. Now we are thinking of the body as something that exists, an entity that exists. And when we think of the mind, we are also thinking that mind is an entity that exists. Now, there is a Western monk who is now living somewhere in Sri Lanka, who writes to the internet. He sends an always email. I get an email every day sent by this man. There he gives portions from sutras, and all the time he is sending out things. And there he speaks about these two things, Nama and Rupa. The way he explains Nama and Rupa, I begin to see that he has understood. Only thing is he is using the words in a different way. That now I say that I speak of experience divided into two, the subjective and the objective. Now every experience is expressed in the English language in the form of a sentence. There is the subject, verb and object, which is also called subject and predicate, but the real thing is the subject, verb and object. So whenever we speak of a subject and an object, we are the object is always something outside and subject is always inside. The object is outside, the subject is inside. Now when I speak of this bottle, the bottle is something outside. Seeing the bottle is something inside. So, the process of seeing and the object seen. The object seen is something outside and the process of seeing is something inside. So that inside part I regard as the mind and the outside part I regard as matter or the object, the subject and the object. So people talk about mind and matter, but they don't really think of it in this way. They think mind and matter are two different entities like that. But they are not two different entities, because whenever we speak of matter, we are speaking of an object. When we speak of mind, we are always speaking about subject to experience. But if you ask what is the subject to experience, you will always have to say that it is an activity of the body that you are aware of. Now if you touch your finger like this, the touching is an object to experience. But when you touch, you feel the touch. That is a subject to experience. It is the same activity you see in two different ways, as an object and as a subject. So what is called matter and mind are not two different things. It is the same thing seen from two different angles, the subject and the object. So that he was talking about Nama and Rupa. Rupa is that object and Nama is the subject. That is how he was explaining Nama and Rupa. But in the same way, so when we speak of the mind, the Buddha used three words: Chitta, Mano and Vijnana. So these are really three activities of the body, but seen from a subjective point of view. Three activities of the body seen from a subjective point of view. Okay. So the important thing is what we call the Vijnana really is the activity of the five senses. We have five senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue and the body. Five senses. And these five senses are stimulated by the environment. We are like organisms in an environment. And this organism is stimulated by the environment through the senses. Light falling on the eye stimulates the eye. Sounds coming to the ear stimulates the ear. Smells coming to the nose stimulate the nose. Taste coming to the tongue stimulate the tongue. And touch coming to the body stimulate the body. So like that. That's stimulation results in a reaction to the stimulus. That reaction comes in the form of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Now that reaction is what is called vijnana. So vijnana is not another entity, some place somewhere. Vijnana is simply the reaction of the senses to the stimulation. So that is what it is all about. So the reaction then the reaction goes again through a nerve, like a message, like a telephone wire carrying messages. A nerve carries a message from the eye to the brain, ear to the brain, nose to the brain, tongue to the brain, body to the brain. And these messages are accepted by the brain, and the brain begins to think. So the thinking is done by a special part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex. So that brain activity is done, which is thinking. And that is what is called mano. So what is called mano vijnana is simply the activity of the brain. And that is what we can call consciousness. So real consciousness is a result of thinking in the brain. So it is different from perception, which is the activity of the senses. This is the activity of the brain. And according to the interpretation given by the brain, that means what you see is given a meaning, that is the interpretation. And according to that meaning given, an emotion is aroused. And that emotional arousal part is what is called chitta. So that is why the Buddha speaks of the raga chitta, the moha chitta, and so on. So the chitta is the activity which is the emotional activity. And this emotional activity is really an activity in the whole body, because the message goes from the brain to a gland, and the gland secretes a hormone, and the hormones are carried to the various parts of the body, and different activities are created in the body. And that activity is what we call emotional arousal. So the emotional arousal is a special activity, specially created by the interpretation given by the thinking part. And it is emotional reaction to what is understood to be going on in the environment. So the understanding is simply the activity of the brain. But then the emotional arousal is an activity of the whole body in different ways. Like the muscles can become tense and the heart may be beating faster and breathing can become heavier and so many other activities keep on starting. And then you say either you have become very passionate or you have become angry or you have become frightened or you have become worried, whatever you call that, it is an activity of the body. And that activity is what is today called stress. And they speak of stress even creating sicknesses in the body. And it can even ultimately lead to death. So it can be so dangerous. And that danger is coming from the activities inside the body. But what about the activities created outside? Like if you are angry, you might start using bad language and insulting other people, and you might even go to fight with other people. And other people will begin to fight back with you. And it can become even a war by, you can continue and get other people to get involved in this same thing. And it might turn into a war. So everything depends on this emotional excitement. So you see, the emotional excitement, that is what is called karma. Really, there are two kinds of karma, good karma and bad karma. The karma really refers to the activity. The emotional activity becomes bad karma and the rational activity becomes good karma. So the action can be based on emotion or it can be based on reason. So rational thinking. So this is why, but normally human beings have an ability to stop that reaction. Even if you become angry, you might be able to stop that anger. Instead of speaking with angry words, you might relax and calm down and think in a good way and act in a good way. So all that is possible for the human being. But in order to do that, you have to become aware of your anger. And that is what is called satipatthana. And that ability to stop the reaction and begin to act in the right way, that is what is called chetana. So chetana is called karma. Chetana aham bhikkhave dhammam vadami. That means the chetana means that decision you make. And that is also what is called willpower. It's the willpower that begins to act in the right way. So, this This is what Sigmund Freud saw, that emotional part is what he called the id, id. And the thinking part, which we call mano, is the ego. He called it ego. Now the word ego refers to a person, whereas the id refers to an inanimate thing. So he wanted to show that whenever you act rationally, that rational part is your real self, and the emotional part is not your real self. It is simply a reaction, inanimate action. So that if you identify yourself with the rational part, then you can be able to control yourself using your reason instead of acting emotionally. So, but he also pointed out that there is a thing called superego, and this superego really refers to what is called the conscience. That means as children, the parents or the adults or whoever looks after the child will begin to tell the child what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. And that is accepted by the child. And then whenever you begin to do something wrong, you begin to feel guilty. Oh, I have done something wrong. Now that feeling of guilt comes from the conscience. That is what is called the conscience. So Freud called that the superego. So that is the meaning of those three things. But the Buddha also used a word for the superego. That is what is called hiri-ottappa. Hiri-ottappa. Hiri means really your reluctance to do something bad. You begin to feel guilty about it. And Ottappa means after you have done something bad, you begin to repent about it. Oh, I did something wrong, that should not have been done. That is the Ottappa. Some people translate it as fear and shame. So those are the meanings of those things. Any other questions?
This is the last part in Buddhist psychology. So I have list up some questions. So now, anyone have any question or anything want to share? Mr. Wu? So I think we end here.
What?
We end here.
What?
We end here.
End? Huh?
Yeah, we end here.
Ah, good. Now it's 9:30.
9:30.
So we'll end it up.
Yeah, we end up here. The next
We
one,
can,
maybe next week, I think.
Recite some blessings
Yeah.
and also share the merits with all departed relatives and all beings by reciting Idang me ñātīnaṃ hotu Sukhita hontu ñātayo Idang me ñātīnaṃ hotu Sukhita hontu ñātayo Idang me ñātīnaṃ hotu Sukhita hontu ñātayo Ettavata ca amyeyi Sambataṃ puñya sampadam Sabbe deva anumodantu Sabbe bhuta anumodantu Sabbe satta anumodantu Sabba sampatti siddhya Idang me punyam Asavakhyavāṃ Sabba dukkha pamucchatu. May through all the merits that you have gained, may every one of you be able to gain freedom from all sufferings of samsara and attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.